As an investigator, as someone whose business is to gather intelligence, to better arm our clients to make strategic decisions, the first thing I would say is call your lawyers and then have your lawyers call me.
Hello, I'm John Jannarone, Editor-in-Chief of CorpGov. Thrilled to be back here at Nasdaq MarketSite, this time on the second floor in Studio B. I have with me today Brendan Foo, a longtime friend of our program. Brendan, thanks for joining. And by the way, Brendan is a partner at Forward Global. Brendan, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me here, John. It's always a pleasure to hang out, talk shop, and catch up.
Absolutely, Brendan. So let's talk about some trends we've seen. Last year, I observed a lot of seldom or first-time activists appear. Do you think that's going to continue in 2025?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, anecdotally, working both offense and defense, we're seeing a lot of newer activists sort of burst into the scene. These are people who are my generation now, right? I'm in my mid-30s. These are people who they've been trained at some of the best shops. They've absorbed market-leading techniques, tactics, and they've been very, very well advised in the past. And for a lot of them, they're thinking to themselves, well, I can go out there and run my own book now, right? Let me run my own campaigns. Let me see how things go. And so we're starting to see a younger crop of activists show up. Any market follower can see some of the more interesting market moving campaigns now have maybe a younger leader behind them. But also in the advisor community, we're seeing a lot of younger advisors, in the law firm community starting to make partner. And these are folks who've been trained very, very well as they've risen up through the ranks. And I think it's an interesting time to be in this space. We're seeing just a new generation step up and maybe take with them a new way of looking at campaigns, looking at shareholder engagement, and thinking about the norms and values that drive, ultimately shareholder value creation.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'm thinking to myself, if I get a call from one of these OG corporate raiders, Carl Icahn, Nelson Peltz, I'm going to be nervous. But what you're saying is you might get a call in a meeting with a regular investor who's never been an activist, and poof, surprise, it happens. So how do you be vigilant about that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, right? So first off, I run an investigations practice within my firm, Forward Global. As an investigator, as someone whose business is to gather intelligence, to better arm our clients to make strategic decisions, the first thing I would say is call your lawyers and then have your lawyers call me. So, we are often brought in by general counsel or outside counsel. That's the very first thing that we tell clients to do. Once they do that, they do that, the next thing to do is to understand who's on the other side. And I think one thing I'm arguing a lot about this year and maybe in the future is because of the way a lot of activism is evolving, it's no longer enough to just think about activist investors, right? I think it's very important for any issuer to think about, well, who else is on my cap table, right?
Yeah.
Who else are my shareholders, right? Like we have a lot of formerly passive investors who are now becoming active investors, even if they're not necessarily activist.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that trend is going to continue to expand. Two things behind that, I think. One of them is just, in this market that we find ourselves in right now, where money is very expensive, when public equities can be very risky. If you're going to continue to stay in the public equities game, in the public markets, then you're going to want to find ways to continue to generate alpha, right? And if you are a very sophisticated investor and you see maybe something's going wrong with your company or your investment, I don't think you necessarily want to, maybe go the whole way, the way like an icon would. But you might say, hey, in the process of safeguarding the value of this investment, I might try to reach out to the company. I might try to make sure that they're running things just a little bit marginally better, just to make my shares worth a bit more. That's an active investor. They're not necessarily going to go, wage a fight, wage like a big public campaign, but they're going to still be engaging. And so very, very important throughout this entire process to make sure that, companies and their teams, and especially their investor relations teams, are constantly thinking about, investors that are continually reaching out to them. Take a meeting, right? Sit down with them, because the very worst thing that you as a company can do is to try to shut down and not be open. I was having a conversation with one of the friends of this group here recently, Bruce over at Okapi, and one of the things we're discussing was that one of the worst things you can do as a company is to refuse to take a call from your investors.
Yeah.
And that I think often is the thing that turns an active investor into an activist investor, because if you're reaching out to the C-suite and they're like, "No, you know what? No, we're too busy." You're reaching out to the board and they're like, "No, we're too busy," or they're brushing you off, or they're playing games with you. You know what? That's going to lead to frustration. That's going to lead to honestly some personality conflicts.
Yeah.
And it's going to lead to them maybe as their next call giving a call to an activist lawyer. And I don't think a lot of defense side people, or I don't think a lot of companies want to see that. Defense side people definitely do.
You're just making the wheels turn, Brendan. I tell companies this with regard to journalists too. Yeah. It's not good to bury your head in the sand. If someone's knocking on the door and they're serious, and journalists, they're it's kind of like they're a stakeholder too in a way, right? So you can't just blow them off. Yeah. Now, but tell me, what can you do to avoid getting blindsided? On a clear day, should you be going through your shareholder register, your cap table, trying to identify potential threats? Is that a good idea?
Oh, absolutely. Two things on a clear day. One of these is make sure you have an advisory team in place, right? I'm talking to companies once in a while. I'm talking to boards, and they say, yeah, what you're doing is really interesting, but we don't have an imminent threat right now, and so can we justify engaging you to do a defensive vetting of our board to look out for vulnerabilities, right? What we would do on a clear day is we would come in with the lawyers, with the financial advisors, with the strategic advisors, with PR, with the other experts, and we'd say, let's either do a tabletop exercise, kind of a preparedness exercise, or let's do preemptive vetting to make sure that the board that you currently have in place are not over tenured, don't have independence concerns, don't have track record issues in their backgrounds. The thing is, if there were to be an activist at the gates, well, they're going to have done their work 6 months in advance, a year in advance. They know all these things already, right? We're coming in helping to alert the board to these issues. But a lot of the times, just from a personal from a purely, I don't necessarily want to know what's out there kind of a vibe. Some boards don't want to know what's out there, or they fear that we might uncover something that puts them in a bad situation. But not knowing is a far worse position to be in than knowing and then having the right experts who can help you to take steps to mitigate. And so we always advise, do some preparedness, do some preemptive vetting, and as you're putting in new directors, new nominees to shore up your defenses, make sure they're well vetted first before you announce them and put them in place. And then secondarily, make sure you do this with a good group of experts who know how to work together well in a clear day, so that when the emergency happens, they're not learning how to work with each other, right? They already know how to work with each other, and they can go straight to work to help you achieve whatever your suitable or most optimal outcomes might be.
I mean, I have to imagine, Brendan, there are a lot of companies out there that don't understand perhaps the mind of an activist. How can you do that? How can you have like a mock activism situation? I mean, is that something you should be doing regularly, like once a year?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. In my ideal world, every public company should be doing an activist preparedness exercise once a year.
Yeah.
We're very lucky that we have very, very good relationships with defense side advisors, lawyers, PR firms, proxy solicitors, financial advisors, and we see things from their perspectives. And I think what's really important is for companies to understand that all these different advisors, they've been through the ringer, right? Sometimes if you're working with an advisor who's been on the offense as well, that's even better, because then they can take with them the activist perspective. I think activists are not here to just, rabble rouse and muckrake. They're not short activists, right? Activists make money when the stock price goes up, ultimately.
Yeah.
And so if you were an activist coming into a situation, coming into a company's shares, well, you want to work with a company to make sure that they're going to do well. You want to help unlock value, generally. And so talk to the advisors who know how an activist might think, who can sort of red team, your board with a hypothetical activist, because they've been through that ringer, and be prepared for some very uncomfortable conversations, because better to do it with the people who have your confidence and trust than with someone who, while the alignment of share price incentives might be there, don't necessarily care for you, the individual, and your job, right? The defense side advisors, on the other hand, well, it's good for us if you keep your job, right?
Yeah.
Or talking to the C-suite or the board. It's good for us if you keep your job. That's what that's what we're helping you to do, so as to unlock value. Well, with the activists, they care a lot about unlocking value, but they don't really care who helps them do it along the way in terms of who's on the company side. So work with trusted allies, I think, is the lesson to take away here.
I want to ask you a question that I actually put to Bruce a few weeks ago when I saw him. And I said, if you're a relatively small company, say a $250 million market cap, are you too small to be on an activist radar screen? And Bruce said, well, it depends. Maybe if it used to be $1 billion company, you bet you're on their radar screen. But what if your stock's been going up and you're still small? Should you still be taking these steps, even though presumably your investors are pretty happy?
Well, your investors are going to be happy until they're not, right? Like, every company would love to have their stock continually go up.
Right.
But we live in a world that's so uncertain. There are a lot of potential exogenous factors out there. And one bad thing could happen and it could wreck a quarter for a company. It could wreck a year for a company. I'm not here to pass judgment on how these people run their companies.
Right.
A lot of them are way smarter than I am. But what I can say is, well, they know their story best, but they may not be able to tell their story best. And so here at Forward Global, we're very, very lucky to have some colleagues, who we work with very, very closely, who know how to tell a story. They know how to spin a narrative out of a company's situation. And so in this case, I would say it's very important to work with good PR people and investor relations people and send that message to your shareholders so that, yes, you might think that just because you're performing well and have been performing well, you're safe, right? Because we always talk about, like, it's a self-selecting bunch. Activists come into companies that are underperforming. But even if you are performing well, you might have a couple of bad quarters and an activist takes a look at it and they might say, you know what, there might be something here that we could do to fix it. Well, make sure that you're preemptively telling your story about what you are doing. Tell the story about why there are exogenous factors and exogenous shocks that are putting you in a bad position. But then more importantly, tell the story about what you're doing to address these exogenous factors. So the next time around, and of course, make sure you actually are carrying out what you say you're doing. So the next time around, it actually bolsters your arguments where you can say, look, we had a couple of bad quarters because of XYZ factors, and here are the proof points as to why we turned it around, how we turned it around, what we did, what we communicated. And it comes back to just engaging shareholders well, making sure that you're proactive, and just working around the clock to tell a good story.
All right, Brendan, we're going to leave it there. I'm really happy to have you here today, and I'm going to see you in a few weeks down in Louisiana.
I'm very excited for that.
All right, this has been Brendan Foo, a partner at Forward Global. I'm John Jannarone, Editor-in-Chief of CorpGov, signing off from Nasdaq MarketSite.